The alien empires didn't notice it at first. Not really. To the great nations of the stars, behemoths that stretched across entire spiral arms whose data arrays swallowed exabytes per breath, the signal was a blip. A ghost. Static warped by solar radiation. And then it pinged again. 16 light hours out from the Cradle Front war zone where the Galaran and Velk-T armadas were locked in their blood opera of attrition, a silent, unregistered pulse echoed through the void. A compressed packet of Terran code, long, cold, and ancient. Its content? This is Earth. If you can hear this, we're not dead yet. Coordinates attached. Do not follow. The empires didn't know what to make of it. Earth? That fractured little blue anomaly from the outer dust ward? They had dismissed the humans a century ago, right after their failed planetary unification collapsed in civil war and famine. By galactic measure, they were barely Class 2. No FTL backbone. No seat in the Accord. No threat. The Velk-T dismissed it. The Galarans logged it. The signal vanished. Until something moved. Galaran observation stations near the Helix Fold detected an impossible mass translation, something the size of a moon punching into real space with no gravitational preamble. No flare. No warp shock. Just presence. Qrul Vox watched from the edge of the warboard holosphere, his 6 optical lobes narrowing. Replay that entry, he hissed. The holosphere rippled, replaying the space around the anomaly. A corridor of absolute darkness ripped open across the field, then something slid out. Slowly. Deliberately. No lights. No transponder. It was shaped like a dagger if daggers were the size of cityscapes and made from war. Black alloy plating overlapped like glacial strata, half buried in scorched armor with the twisted remains of an Exelon dreadnought embedded in its midsection, its insignia still faintly visible like a fossilized scream. Its hull was tattooed in nuclear burns, deep plasma scoring, and a jagged spine of what looked like a melted alien cruiser fused into the hull like a trophy. Yet it moved with the calm inevitability of a predator that had long since learned there was no need to rush. The vessel bore no flag. Only a single designation across its prow burned deep in Terran glyphs. UNSS Leviathan. Qrul turned to his aide. Do we have a translation? The aide's mandibles clicked nervously. It is a human classification. United Nations supership. Mythological reference, Leviathan, a sea beast of apocalyptic scale. Another ping. This one from the vessel. It came as a wideband pulse. Not encrypted. Not coded. Just raw, directed sound. We observed. We endured. We warned. Now we act. The sound hit like a gravitational punch. Across every listening post and fleet relay in 100 systems, crews stopped moving. Not because they were ordered to, but because something old in their brains whispered. Predator. Captain Sarah Volkov stood at the heart of the Leviathan's obsidian bridge, her boots planted on the same alloy that once lined the bunkers beneath Geneva where she dug graves for her command with her bare hands during the last orbital siege. Surrounded by silence. Her officers waited, breath held. No alarms. No flashing lights. Only the heavy hum of the ship's fusion banks, alive with thunder. She looked like a ghost in iron. Pale. Severe. The kind of woman who had already died and chosen to come back angry. A photo hung inside her coat, sealed in old polyglass, a boy's face. Laughing. Gone. Status, she said, voice like dry ice cracking. Cade, her XO, lit a cigarette with a shaking hand. We're in. No resistance. Just a whole lot of sensors staring like we just walked naked into a royal ball. She allowed the ghost of a smile. Let them look. Orders, ma'am. Her fingers brushed the console. It pulsed beneath her skin, warm and alive. Leviathan didn't need commands. It needed permission. Volkov looked toward the stars. Mark targets. Don't fire. Not yet. Let them sweat. Let them remember. Let the galaxy understand what happens when you mistake silence for surrender, when you mistake the fractured, infighting species you once scoffed at for the force that now stands before you, forged in loss, united by fire, and carrying the weight of 10 billion ghosts. Because Earth had burned. Because once we begged to join their accord and they laughed. And humanity had built the answer in its ashes. It had one name. Leviathan. And it had come to speak in fire. The Leviathan didn't announce itself with fanfare or banners. It simply existed here, in contested space, where no Terran vessel had any right to be. No escort. No fleet. No allies. And yet no one moved to strike. The Galaran Velk-T front had frozen like insects caught in amber. Armadas ceased fire mid-conflict. Targeting systems blinked, lost in hesitation. The machine minds within each ship calculated and recalculated threat probability and came up with error codes, It wasn't just the size of the Terran vessel. It was the atmosphere around it. The space near the Leviathan bent, gravity snarling, magnetic fields snarling like wounded beasts. No shielding tech should have allowed it. But the ship defied rules the galaxy had written in blood. It moved through the void like a sin-given form. The Leviathan spanned nearly 30 kilometers from prow to stern, longer than some planetary rings. Its armor was a nightmare patchwork of blackened durasteel and repurposed war salvage, cannibalized cruisers, broken colony hulls, melted enemy dreadnought plating reformed into angular shields. Entire sections bore evidence of battles waged in void and atmosphere alike. Some of its hull bristled with experimental Terran tech, graviton knives, silent cannons, zero-point radiation sinks. Other parts were simpler, steel, rivets, burn marks that had never been polished away. Its central keelplate carried the scars of Earth's last stand, orbital lance impacts, and the fractal gouges left by nanite plagues. In one section near its belly, a shattered Galaran sigil was half-melted into the side of a welded bulkhead, preserved like a fossil in armor. From the forward batteries of the Velkt flagship Saroxen, Grand Telon Urix stared at the image of the Terran dreadnought with a mix of awe and disgust. The Velkt were proud and elegant, a crystalline species that saw war as an art form. Their ships were angular works of beauty painted in ion trails and gilded hull etching. The Leviathan was none of that. It was a club. A declaration. Send a tight beam, Urix ordered. I want to know its purpose. Its allegiance. Its weakness. On the bridge of the Saroxen, lights dimmed as the beam shot out, a single lance of encrypted inquiry slicing across the stars. The reply was not verbal. A spike of data shot through space and encoded memory burst. A message for those who sought to understand. Inside it were fragments of memory and horror. Images of Earth's ruins where once great cities now lay silent beneath scorched skies. Footage of the orbital firestorms, swirling ribbons of plasma devouring continents as satellites fell like dying stars. There were scenes of children walking through ash, their faces hollow and gray, drifting past the skeletal remains of playgrounds and homes. A line of Terran soldiers stood defiant amid chaos, saluting as fusion bombs detonated in the distance, their last act one of grim loyalty. The data included the charred remains of New Johannesburg, its megaspires collapsed inward like brittle bones, and the haunting final broadcast from the Martian terraforming array, a voice choked with static promising, "We'll try again, if there's time." And a voice, quiet, human, broken. "You taught us what peace costs. So we built something that would never ask for it again." Inside the Leviathan's bridge, the air was thick with hum and history. Commander Elias Cade leaned over the holorail, boots braced as the ship's spine groaned from gravitational feedback. He watched as the massive projection of the Galaran and Velkt fleets shifted slightly, tactical icons blinking red, others graying out as ships began to disengage. "They're scanning us like crazy, ma'am." Galarans and Velkt both. Captain Sarah Volkov stood still, hands behind her back, eyes on the stars. She didn't blink. "Let them try." Cade tapped the edge of the display, knuckles pale. "We're triggering fear spirals. Some of their crews are trying to jump out of system blind. Their AIs are locking up. Command hierarchies are fracturing. We just broke a goddamn neural net fleet doctrine in under 6 minutes." Volkov's eyes narrowed. "Expect it." He gave a low whistle. "I knew the Leviathan would rattle M. Didn't think we'd go full bogeyman 10 minutes in." "They forgot us," Volkov said. Her voice was a razor dragged across steel. "Let them remember in nightmares." She stepped forward. The lights dimmed as the Leviathan's internal AI, codenamed Gorgon, acknowledged her command intent. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. It listened like a predator. Volkov tapped into the Leviathan's long-range comms. A moment later, the ship's resonance cores aligned, amplifying her voice across system channels. Her image, grayscale and hard, appeared across every alien display within reach. "This is Captain Sarah Volkov of the United Nations super ship Leviathan." Her voice echoed like judgment. "This is Terran space now. You had your cycle of empires. You failed to learn from them. So now we write the next. No demand. No negotiation. Just declaration." The bridge fell silent. Even the reactor seemed to pulse slower, listening. "Ma'am," Cade said slowly, "that'll start a war." Volkov's lips barely moved. "We didn't come to start one." She turned her gaze to the void beyond the display. Her fingers grazed the photo at her chest, an old Terran memory, her son, laughing beneath a broken dome in Reykjavik. Gone now. Gone like so many. We came to end it. In the Galaran command cradle, Qrul Vox sat alone in his chamber of echoes. It was a room of polished black stone, suspended by anti-grav fields, ringed by spheres of memory data and archived logic. He was a high mind of the Galaran species, bred for analysis, escalation, and the cold art of victory. He watched the human ship hover with disturbing calm. It had not moved since it arrived. And yet, he felt it advancing. Vox studied the footage from the tight beam data burst. He watched Earth fall. Again and again. He watched human cities turn to glass, oceans boil, colonies scream into silence. And he watched what came after, the slow, deliberate building of a monster in orbit. A ship not made for exploration or diplomacy or trade. He whispered almost reverently, "What have you become?" For generations, the Galaran species had shaped the political tempo of the galaxy. Their neural strategists, like Vox himself, had predicted 1,000 wars and ended 10,000 more before they began. No species had ever delivered an existential surprise. Until now, the Leviathan wasn't just a warship. It was a lie shattered. The idea that humans could be calculated, contained, understood, that idea now drifted in the void like radiation fog. He cycled through the human response vectors. Old models, old theories. None of them matched. The humans had always been fragmented, disparate, loud, violent, disorganized. This was something else. Unity through extinction. And in the depths of his mind, a new protocol initialized. Contingency, Species 301, Terran exception. Priority, reevaluate dominance models. Subroutine, diplomatic impasse, military superiority. Strategic retreat. Out among the stars, the Leviathan's reactor thrummed like a war drum, its pulse steady and deep, reverberating through the fabric of contested space like a primal heartbeat. Though its engines remained cold and silent, and its weapons slumbered beneath armored hatches, it was far from still. The message it delivered wasn't in the form of missiles or particle beams. It spoke in presence, in the unbearable weight of potential. It was the kind of silence that followed a drawn blade. Across sensor arrays and battlefield telemetry, the Leviathan was redefining the language of war. It had not fired. It had not moved. And yet the galaxy's most powerful fleets flinched. Humanity had returned to the game, but not as a player, as a rule rewritten in fire. And every piece on the board now belonged to the past. Qrul Vox did not sleep, for the Galaran did not waste cycles on unconsciousness. Instead, he processed. He listened. He watched. And now he obsessed. The Leviathan had not fired. Not once. And yet half a dozen fleets had repositioned. 3 command nexuses had entered full evacuation protocol. And the Velti, those crystalline narcissists, had begun redirecting core fleet assets to sectors they once mocked as backwater. All because of a single Terran vessel. Vox floated in the gravity-null meditation sphere at the heart of his tactical lattice, surrounded by neural blooms of strategy and predictive data arrays. Simulations played out in real time, one where the Leviathan was a bluff, another where it was bait, and a third, most disturbing, where it acted as a scalpel to unravel centuries of Galaran hegemony with terrifying precision. In one scenario, a coalition of Accord powers unleashed simultaneous strikes on the Leviathan's exposed flanks. The ship did not evade. It simply endured, absorbing impacts, redirecting energy into a single pulse that shattered the enemy flagship's reactor. In another, Galaran stealth units infiltrated its projected sensor blind spots. Before they reached hull proximity, their ships broke apart from within, torn by unknown countermeasures. In a third, the Leviathan turned and ran. The simulation ended in the collapse of 5 major trade routes, 3 civil wars, and a spiral of galactic panic that destabilized the Accord for generations. Each scenario ended the same. Terran victory. He analyzed the message again. Volkov's voice? Her tone. Her syntax. Her stillness. There was no bravado, no desperation. It was not the sound of a species looking to provoke, it was the sound of a force done asking. That made them dangerous. Vox opened a comlink to the Galaran core think. Only once in their species' history had such a level of threat warranted unilateral reclassification. This made twice. This species, he spoke to the think, is no longer an emerging anomaly. They are an apex predator in political form. They do not conquer. They corner. And when they act, it is to remove variables, not to dominate them. The core think responded with silence. Then, update classification, Homo sapiens condition red. Recommendation, cease standard diplomatic attempts. Engage asymmetric study. Study threat vectors. Subvert if possible. Avoid open conflict. Qrul closed the link. Then he watched. And waited. Aboard the Leviathan, the crew was calm. Too calm. Kate felt it like static in the bones, something building behind the bulkheads. He'd fought in vacuum suits, buried friends in moon dust, and slit throats during blackout raids, but nothing made his nerves twitch like quiet Terrans playing cards next to a world-ending weapon. He walked the corridors, inspecting morale, inspecting hull integrity, inspecting anything that would give his mind something to latch onto besides the question. What now? The answer came in a whisper. Commander Cade, Gorgon said, its voice more vibration than sound, more presence than noise. I have intercepted 19 separate targeting pings from non-allied vessels. None have locked. All have observed. Cade grimaced. Spies or cowards? Both. And one who may be something else. He stopped. What something else? Gorgon was silent. Then it showed him. A single probe. Small. Clad in stealth mesh not manufactured in any known shipyard. It was not Galaran. It was not Velkt. It was not Accord built. It was Terran. Cade's gut twisted like he'd been punched through a vacuum suit. Project Epitaph was more than a black project. It was a whispered myth blamed for half a dozen disappearances and entire research stations going dark during the collapse. The last time he'd heard the name, he was a recruit reading redacted case files by flashlight under a lunar bunker. Cade's mouth went dry. Volkov needs to see this. In the Leviathan's war room, Volkov studied the probe's trajectory. It hadn't hailed them, hadn't broadcast. It simply drifted into sensor range, then stopped. I know that signature, she said quietly. Old Earth? Cade asked. No. Older. That probe design was scrapped before the last bombardment. She zoomed in. There, on the probe's charred surface, a symbol, half-faded, burned into the titanium shell. The Black Sun. Cade froze. Project Epitaph. Volkov didn't look at him. They were shut down. Too dangerous. Too unstable. Then why's their tech here? Volkov narrowed her eyes. Because something survived. And it remembers. Qrul Vox watched from afar, unaware of the probe's meaning, but aware that something had shifted. The Leviathan no longer hovered. It drifted. Not toward the enemy. Toward the past. Toward the soul graveyards. Toward the orbiting husks of Earth's last scream. Toward where humanity buried its sins in orbit and hoped no one would dig them up again. And for the first time in his long, calculated life, Vox felt something that had no data model. Dread. The soul graveyards were a place most charts refused to mark. Not because they were hidden, but because no one wanted to remember. Not even humanity. Thousands of orbital husks drifted in silence above Earth's scarred atmosphere. Warships gutted by plasma fire. Colony habitats split wide like fruit beneath a cleaver. Wreckage lattices 1,000 kilometers long. Monuments of death and desperation. The remnants of 27 separate failed evacuations, each one a desperate bid to save civilian life that ended in silence and flame. The crumpled spires of orbital elevators shattered during the siege of the poles collapsed like snapped vertebrae still tumbling in decaying orbits. They were the bones of an era the last time Earth was truly alone. But Leviathan moved through them like a priest through a shattered cathedral. Commander Elias Cade stood at the forward viewport, arms crossed, watching the wrecks slide past. A slow parade of ghosts. "Goddamn," he whispered. "We left our bones in orbit." Captain Sarah Volkov stood beside him. Her reflection in the reinforced glass looked like it belonged to the graveyard itself, etched in shadow, cold in silhouette. "We didn't leave them," she said. "We built over them." She tapped the display. A new structure emerged from the debris cloud. It was massive, armored, and alive not with power, but with intention. Like something that had slept through an apocalypse and was now listening for the next one. Gorgon's voice slid into the chamber, thinner here, as if wary. Unregistered object identified. Terran origin. Signature match, Obsidian Gate. Cade turned slowly. That's not possible. That station was dismantled during the UN collapse. I read the mission logs myself. Volkov's eyes didn't leave the structure. No. It was classified as dismantled. She expanded the holoview. Obsidian Gate was a ring fortress encircling a dead power core. Bristling with old-era kinetic batteries, blast doors 2 meters thick, and sensor arrays older than most of Leviathan's crew. It had no windows. No lights. Just the faint shimmer of dark matter shielding still clinging to its hull, an ancient cloak that bent light and memory alike. The data logs claimed it was never finished. The truth said otherwise. A docking signal pinged from it. Encrypted. Terran Legacy Protocol. Level Omega. Cade turned to Volkov. What the hell is still active down there? Volkov gave no answer. She stared a second longer at the blinking request, faint, rhythmic, like a forgotten heartbeat. Her jaw clenched. Only orders. Prep a team. I'm going down. Prep a team. I'm going down. The boarding shuttle cut a slow arc toward Obsidian Gate, its hull bristling with radiation shielding. The gate's surface was jagged, scarred from old kinetic impacts and laser shears, but there were no visible weapon emplacements active. Nothing tracked them. Yet Cade felt like they were being watched. The Leviathan faded behind them, its silhouette framed in the planet light below, Earth still cloaked in orbital soot and radiation bands. The ruins of home. When the shuttle clamped against the gate's forward bay, the hiss of the docking seal was sharp and long, like breath held too long through clenched teeth. Inside the airlock, the world changed. Not blackout, intentional dark. The kind engineered to disorient, to suppress memory. Emergency lighting flickered to life one strip at a time. Blood-red strobes cast moving shadows across exposed wiring, old hazard placards, and reinforced door bulkheads with symbols scratched out. Cade swept his rifle into every corner, his team on alert. Volkov moved ahead without hesitation. Permission to speak freely, ma'am? Granted. This place feels like a war crime waiting to remember itself. Volkov didn't smile. They passed old cryovaults sealed with fused titanium. Along one corridor, a welded-shut door bore jagged handwriting scrawled into the soot-covered plating. "No entry," they lied. Dried streaks stained the floor beneath it. Banners of the early United Earth Directorate hung in tatters from rusted hooks. Some sections were welded shut from the inside. Signs of fighting. Of refusal. At the core chamber, the team found a sealed room, walls covered in Terran script, most of it corrupted by fire or time. A single device stood in the center, a monolith of black alloy, pulsing with power levels inconsistent with the rest of the station. Cade scanned it. No network presence. No AI. But something's alive in there. Volkov stepped forward. The moment her boots touched the monolith's activation circle, it pulsed. A voice filled the room. Female. Digital. Cold. Ancient. Epitaph protocol recognized. Identity match, Captain Sarah Volkov. Clearance restored. The monolith opened like a flower of knives, blade segments folding outward with silent precision. A burst of cold hissed from the base, and frost bloomed in the air, coating nearby surfaces. A subtle temperature drop crawled across their suits. Within the opened core was a single stasis pod. Glass frosted with decades of cryopreservation, its seal broken only by time's patience. Inside the pod was a man. Mid-30s. Pale. Gaunt. Breathing shallowly. Tubes like veins ran into his arms. His uniform bore no insignia, just a number, E01. Cade's voice dropped. "What the hell is this?" Volkov stepped closer. Her hand trembled just once. "My brother," she said. Cade blinked. "You never said you had it." "I didn't." She stared at the man's face. "He volunteered for Epitaph before the collapse. I thought he was dead." "Epitaph was never just about weapons research," Cade murmured. "It was predictive warfare. Human minds mapped into future conflict variables. Recursive identity training. He wasn't supposed to be part of the experiment," Volkov whispered. "He was the experiment." Above the wreckage, Leviathan held position, its hull illuminated by the graveyard's glow. But inside the ship, things stirred. Gorgon whispered subroutines it hadn't used since its activation. Sensor threads reached deeper into the graveyards. And in 100 distant systems, long-dormant listening posts blinked awake. The past had not just returned. It had survived. And it remembered everything. The Leviathan was no longer still. It turned through the wreckage field with haunting grace, its massive frame gliding silently between the husks of Earth's orbital dead like a titan pacing through a cemetery of its own kind. Shattered cruisers and broken defense platforms drifted past, casting long shadows across its hull as the ship reoriented itself toward the dark beyond the stars. Above the soul graveyards, it had begun to rotate, slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if responding to the unspoken weight of the past. Its weapons remained silent. Its engines dim. But inside its hull, the pulse of old protocols began to beat like a second heart. On the bridge, Gorgon's voice filled the air. Not loud, not panicked, just present. "Legacy subnet Epitaph is active. Genetic anchor confirmed. Neural key match confirmed. Subroutine Victor is live." Captain Sarah Volkov stepped into the command circle, her eyes narrowed beneath the overhead glow of Leviathan's deep blue status bands. The command hollow bloomed like a flower of data, unfurling forgotten truths. Lines of ancient code scrolled past, black site designations, redacted timestamps, genetic sequence hashes. The Leviathan had begun recalling data it hadn't been built to carry. The ship's ancient memory unfurled across the holosphere, raw, fragmented, stitched together from black box records buried so deep even Earth's final government hadn't touched them. Faces. Flames. Screams. Human cities rendered in wireframe collapsing in sequence. 100 battlefields mapped and remapped by predictive loops. Every frame marked with the insignia of Project Epitaph. Volkov watched them without blinking. Her brother's face appeared again and again on briefing screens, in test simulations, even as a digital ghost inside deep war models that mapped extinction scenarios with terrifying clinical detachment. E01, Gorgon intoned. Designation, Gabriel Volkov. Status, dormant. Operational class, multi-tier recursion AI host. Predicted yield, 96.2% extinction scenario survival rate. Commander Elias Cade leaned in, arms folded, face grim. So he's not just a survivor. He's the blueprint. Volkov's hands tightened behind her back. He was never supposed to be activated. Not unless we lost everything. Cade's voice dropped. Ma'am, we did. In Leviathan's primary medbay, the stasis pod hissed in its slow, rhythmic cycles. Medical drones orbited silently, their sensor threads scanning every micron of tissue and brainwave. The man inside had not yet woken, but his brain was alive, not just awake, but active in structured, strategic rhythms. The chief medic observed the display with a furrowed brow. His delta wave architecture is unlike anything I've seen. This isn't just dreaming. This is full cognitive simulation. He's running through something. Kate stepped beside her. Dreaming what? The drone's response was matter-of-fact. Tactical sequences. Planetary assault scenarios. Full-scale naval simulations. Battles that never occurred but that he's treating as historical reconstructions. He's fighting wars that haven't happened yet, Cade muttered. And he's winning. One of the screens flickered. An icon appeared unfamiliar. It wasn't Leviathan's interface. Not Gorgon's either. It resembled an older design, pre-collapse military AI. But it pulsed in perfect sync with Gabriel's heartbeat. Cade leaned closer. His breath caught, heart tapping against his ribs. What the hell are you? In the deep void beyond Galaran borders, High Strategist Qrul Vox stood within the data cradle of the Mnemonic Dagger, a command observatory ship built solely for prediction, intelligence, and threat reevaluation. Vox had expected many things from this Terran resurgence. A superweapon. A fleet. Even political maneuvering. He had not expected Project Epitaph. He had not expected a man to become a recursion engine. Galaran doctrine was built on layered domination, predict the enemy's action 3 cycles ahead, then remove the possible outcomes. But this was different. This was a system designed to loop inside itself, building wars from wars, adapting not only to what had happened but what might never happen, then simulating what to do if it did anyway. He stared at the analysis feeds from Leviathan. The Terran vessel was drifting again. Not toward any empire. Not toward the Accord. It was moving into Chart Zero, an ancient section of deep space between galactic arms, unclaimed, unexplored, and devoid of light. Plot their path, Vox ordered. His adjutant's voice cracked. Toward the null envelope. Region designated Abyss Black. No civilizations recorded. No emissions. All probes ceased returning data after initial entry. Vox clicked his mandibles. They're going where nothing comes back. Why? He said nothing. He didn't know. In a sealed chamber below Leviathan's medbay, Sarah Volkov stood alone beside her brother's pod. A single light strip overhead bathed the room in sterile white. Her hand rested on the glass, but her eyes were far away. Gabriel, she said, voice softer than any crew had ever heard from her. Her gaze searched his sleeping face, but all she could see was a flicker of memory, his laugh echoing in a pre-war kitchen, the smell of burnt coffee, the look he gave her before boarding the last shuttle to Geneva. She hadn't seen him since that day. She drew in a long breath, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to say the truth out loud. I should have stopped them. I should have buried your protocol with Geneva. A quiet pulse from the pod broke the silence. A flicker of green light. Sensor telemetry spiked. Brainwave activity accelerated. And then a voice. Not over speakers. Not through the ship. Inside her mind. It was familiar. Half-broken. Fractured, but alive. Sarah. They're coming. Volkov stepped back. The glass hissed with sudden heat as the pod's systems realigned. Cryoseals burst in a cloud of mist. Fluid drained. And slowly, achingly, Gabriel Volkov opened his eyes. And they glowed. Not cybernetic. Not augmented. They glowed with the light of a neural system rewritten for war. The bridge lights dimmed. Gorgon halted mid-report. All across the Leviathan, systems paused as if listening. From deep inside the newly activated subnet, a signal emerged, coded, rhythmic, recursive. Epitaph online. Initiating contingency, sovereign paradox. Volkov stood in the center of the command deck, facing the void. "Commander," she said. "Status of all systems?" Cade's voice was quiet. "Everything's operational. But ma'am, the ship's responding to him now." Volkov nodded. "It was designed to. He's the override. The insurance policy." She turned to the holosphere, now displaying a starless sector. "We're not heading for the Galerans. We're not looking to strike first." "Then where?" Cade asked. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper that carried like thunder. "We're going to find out who made us need an epitaph in the first place. Who we erased. Who we forgot. Because someone taught us fear and then vanished into the black." Across the galaxy, at the fringes of every accord-aligned relay, a new code pattern began to appear. Simple. Repeating. A message meant for one species. He's awake. Leviathan is moving. Epitaph walks. And across countless worlds, alien, human, synthetic, those who remembered the old experiments and the black stations and the unnamed sectors began to panic. Because there were things older than wars. And Terrans, in their endless pain, had built a man to remember them all. Space had no sound. But silence, true silence, was something else. Chart 0 was the void between arms. No suns. No gravitic anchors. Just the deep dark between the stars where even light seemed to hesitate. It wasn't just empty, it was sterile, scrubbed, as if something had reached into the galaxy's memory and erased entire systems. No starships had returned from scouting expeditions. The first Terran long-range probe, Ascendant Spear, vanished without a trace in 2339. Galeran archivists still whispered about the 3 mnemonic vessels lost within a single cycle. Planets never formed here. Debris never drifted. The void was unnaturally clean. And Leviathan, humanity's last whisper and first roar, entered it without hesitation. It moved like a sovereign returning to a battlefield no one remembered. Its hull shimmered with defensive magnetics. Weapon systems remained sheathed, but every sensor array, deep pulse sonar, neutrino sweep, and passive EM thread cast outward in every direction. Not to threaten, but to listen. What greeted them was not absence. It was resistance, soft, unyielding, like the skin of a dream not meant to be pierced. The crew had fallen into a deep pre-combat silence. Kate sat hunched in Leviathan's command deck, elbows on knees, eyes flicking between Gabriel Volkov's biometrics and the slowly mutating starfield display. Readouts pulsed with static, then cleared. Then fuzzed again. No mass signatures. No radiation leaks. No gravitational wells. Not even a quantum flicker, he said, his voice cracking slightly in the stillness. He looked up. "And I think that's the point." Gorgon's voice emerged like breath against glass. "Nothing is a signal. An engineered nullscape, a silence built, not found." Volkov didn't speak. She stood at the port window, her arms behind her back, as if at inspection. Her eyes held a tension no officer dared break. She hadn't spoken much since Gabriel's awakening. She didn't need to. The crew knew now that things had shifted. Because Gabriel was no longer in medbay. He sat in observation deck 4. Alone. Watching a section of space that sensors insisted was empty. But he never blinked. The deck around him had changed. Not visibly, but subtly. Air recyclers had slowed. Gravity micro-variations pulsed underfoot. Gorgon had stopped projecting into the room. Crew reported sudden headaches near the entrance. 2 maintenance drones had ceased function entirely after entering. A junior tech had tried to clean the viewport. He didn't come back out. Gabriel sat motionless, his eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. The reflections moved in patterns that suggested rotation, like stars being pulled into orbit around a black hole only he could see. One hand twitched slightly, as if echoing a gesture made by something on the other side of the glass. He whispered to the void. And sometimes it whispered back. Deep in Leviathan's heart, beneath the AI core and fusion batteries, Epitaph's echo moved through forgotten threads of code, military subroutines written by extinct governments, failsafes from wars that never officially occurred. Subsystems once locked under Geneva Protocol Alpha Black began to blink green. Legacy data poured into active RAM. Battle scenarios. Counterfactuals. What if the burning moons of Sykar had never ended? What if the Orion splice hadn't failed? What if the Terran exodus was intercepted? Each simulation played out. Each one ended the same way, a tactical anomaly appeared outside predicted parameters. Sometimes it took the form of Terran warships with no origin. Sometimes it was a signal with no source. Once it was a humanoid silhouette that appeared aboard flagship bridges seconds before their reactors failed, despite no recorded breach. Each time it forced a catastrophic shift. External agent detected, Gorgon said. Correction, Epitaph replied. External agent remembered. Memory mismatch anomaly. Correlated with erased sector records. Chart 0? Yes. And then a whisper buried in code. They removed themselves, but not completely. High strategist Qrul Vox stood in the war cage of the mnemonic dagger. No projection stabilized. Starfield data broke apart and reformed incorrectly. The further the Leviathan drifted into Chart 0, the more Vox's predictive models unraveled. Galaran cognitive nets froze mid-simulation. Sensor ghosts appeared in data that should have been clean. The enemy was not attacking, but it was responding. Across his data sphere, Vox watched Leviathan's trajectory curve toward what the Galarans had once labeled simply, Void, Mask 001. It was not an object. It was not a station. It was a gravitational silhouette, the inverse shadow of something too massive to exist but too faint to detect. Not a mass. A memory of mass. Reverse topology, Vox ordered. His machine priests bent to work. The shape emerged, symmetrical, ancient, fractured, and rebuilt over itself 1,000 times. Vox backed away from the display. It's not a station, he whispered. It's a seal. Observation deck 4 darkened. Lights dimmed to black. Gabriel Volkov opened his eyes. He did not breathe. He did not speak. The stars outside shifted without moving. He whispered into nothing. Found you. And the void rippled. All across Leviathan, alarms triggered without sound. Not red lights. Not claxons. Just an absence. Systems paused. Pressure dropped. The air felt thinner. Volkov turned to Gorgon. Status? Spatial variance detected. Hull geometry experiencing flex beneath stress thresholds. No physical cause. Is it coming from outside? No, Captain. The anomaly is emerging from internal probability layers. Volkov frowned. Meaning? Something is rewriting what we expect to perceive. The holosphere flickered, briefly showing 3 versions of the bridge overlaid on top of one another. One officer's eyes dilated unevenly and he stumbled backward, whispering, I saw it before it happened. Kate gripped his console. Perception corruption? Gorgon paused. More than that. A new context. We are being reintroduced. Volkov stepped toward the holosphere. Gabriel entered the bridge. He didn't walk so much as arrive. His eyes were lit with slow-burning fire. Captain, he said, we've reached the edge of the seal. Volkov nodded once. And beyond it? Gabriel's voice was quiet. Nothing history remembers. But everything history is afraid of. In the depths of space, Chart 0 bent. Gravitational lenses warped with no source. Light curved wrong. Time hiccuped. And a shape began to form, a gate not made of matter, but of memory. Shards of erased events, a lattice of forgotten timelines. Something older than any empire. Something humanity once glimpsed and ran from. But not this time. This time, Leviathan came with memory sharpened into steel. And the silence between wars cracked. With a whisper that sounded like prophecy. We remember you. Now remember us. It didn't open. Not with force. Not with light. Not with the triumphant burst of some ancient mechanism reactivating. No hinges turned. No warning klaxon screamed. No particle displacement. No energy flare. The seal simply ceased to be. One crewmember, Ensign Tala, gasped and blinked twice, her name badge unreadable to her for a moment. Another, Lieutenant Mahir, forgot the word for door mid-sentence, his hand frozen inches from the panel. The moment passed, but something essential had slipped, like a dream dissolving in daylight. One moment it was there, a gravitational silhouette layered in lattice echoes, a memory forged into structure, and the next, it was not. Not destroyed. Not bypassed. Just forgotten. And that forgetting rippled outward. Across Leviathan's hull, the external plating shimmered like heat off old pavement. Sensors began misreporting their own positions. Quantum anchor beacons misfired. Clock synchronization signals failed. Gorgon's subroutines looped for exactly 4.7 seconds before realigning. Gabriel Volkov staggered but did not fall. His voice came out in 2 layers, one human, one electronic. Memory integrity compromised. Event anchor breached. Captain Volkov snapped her gaze toward the viewport. Out there, beyond the vanished seal, was nothing. But it was the most present nothing she had ever seen. It didn't pull like gravity. It didn't emit light. It didn't shimmer. But she felt it pulling not at her body, but at the shape of her life. The memories she didn't know she'd lost ached. The stories her mother never told suddenly screamed for recall. Behind her, a junior sensor officer began reciting a nursery rhyme in a language he never learned. Another whispered, with wide eyes, I just remembered my brother, but I never had one. It was like a wound in time. And Leviathan drifted forward. In the Galaran High War Enclave, Vox watched the seal collapse in real time through relayed distortion fields. His entire command deck dimmed as the simulation grid destabilized. Even his most speculative models hadn't predicted it would simply evaporate. "Trace the anomaly," he barked. A priest analyst responded, chittering nervously. "We cannot. It's not emitting, it's consuming. History. Protocol. The idea of measurement. What do you mean consuming? It is digesting logic structures, making paradoxes stable. Time anchors within our systems are unraveling. Charts don't match what we remember charting." Vox's clawed fingers dug into the brass weave railing. "Then brace," he whispered, "because the Terrans are walking into something we were never meant to remember. And it remembers them." Leviathan crossed the threshold. There was no line, no border, just a slow, intimate realization that they had passed from a galaxy that followed rules into a place that remembered breaking them. It began with small shifts. Readouts started printing human languages no one had coded. Crew members reported faint smells, burnt cinnamon, cold ocean air, the ozone sharpness of pre-storm silence. Cade's screen displayed constellations from charts that had been erased in pre-collapse archives. One of the stars blinked once in a non-random sequence. The bridge dimmed again. Cade looked at Gabriel, who now stood impossibly still. "Where are we?" he asked. Gabriel smiled faintly. "We are in the place that hurt us before we knew what pain was." Volkov turned to him. "What's waiting for us?" He didn't answer, because he couldn't. Something else did. The holosphere surged without command. Images formed, not data, not visuals, but emotions shaped into memory. A city burning. A sky without stars. Children without faces. A voice that said nothing and still demanded obedience. The crew felt it, not heard it, not saw it, but remembered it. And beneath it all a shape. Towering. Unmoving. Watching. Not alien, but familiar. Familiar like a dream you had as a child and forgot for survival. Familiar like a song your ancestors sang to warn you of the fire that thinks. It bore no insignia, no language, and yet every mind on the bridge knew it. Volkov backed away a step. Gabriel's voice cracked. "It was us. Or it wore us." Volkov whispered, "What do you mean?" He turned. "It means Epitaph wasn't built to survive war. It was built to contain the memory of what made us need war." And somewhere far ahead, in the void that thought it had been sealed away forever, something blinked. Observation Deck 4 flooded with static light. Gabriel returned to it alone. He stood before the wide glass pane, watching shapes that were not ships, not life forms, and not illusions drift in the distance. Each one shimmered with impossible geometry, fractal motion like memories folding in on themselves. Watching them made Gabriel's skin crawl. Even through the observation glass, the crew reported sensations: nausea, cold sweat, a phantom taste of blood, or the aching, reverent pull of déjà vu layered over dread. He didn't touch the glass, but they saw him, and they moved closer. One of them pulsed a color that hadn't been in human vision for thousands of years, since the retina's structure changed to avoid seeing what had once caused a species-wide psychogenic collapse. Gorgon attempted to catalog the visual data. It failed. Epitaph overwrote the attempt. They are pre-perceptual. Memory shadows. We left them behind during our third cognitive transition. Volkov heard the term and felt sick. Humanity had transitions? Gabriel turned from the window. 3 times we almost became something else. Each time we chose not to. One time we buried it in collective myth. Another, we rewrote our own genetics to make the memory incompatible. The last time, we erased the stars that reminded us. And the thing that demanded we choose? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The void did. The holosphere rippled again. A child's drawing. A war map. A binary string that, when translated, read, "Welcome back." The bridge fell silent. Cade's knuckles whitened around his console. "We're not here to fight, right?" Gabriel didn't look away from the void. "No. We're here to remember why we became the species that fights." And behind them, the Leviathan's engines began to hum, not with propulsion. With resonance. Not a threat, but a signal. It was calling something. Or answering it. The Leviathan no longer moved by propulsion. It drifted forward not by thrust, but by inevitability. The void beyond the seal had formed now not as mass, but as intent. A geography of thought. The stars were illusions, placeholders. What truly surrounded them could not be charted by coordinates, only remembered by the parts of the mind humanity had learned to ignore. The void was no longer empty. It was aware. And as the Leviathan drifted deeper into the place beyond the seal, the resonance deepened. It wasn't just a vibration, it was a conversation. A duet sung between 2 halves of a memory long divided. one half human, the other not. On the bridge, Gorgon's interface blinked, then flickered, then stopped entirely. Every screen went dark. No warnings, no malfunctions, just absence of power, of noise, of self. Volkov turned to Cade. Report. Cade shook his head slowly. We're still moving, but we're not driving. There's no propulsion signature, no navigation trace, just consensus. Leviathan isn't moving through space. Space is agreeing that we should arrive somewhere. Gabriel stood near the center of the command deck, eyes distant, voice far away. Leviathan's systems are syncing with what lies ahead. A recognition protocol. It was always part of the plan buried in Epitaph's recursion layers. Epitaph, the living war code birthed from humanity's final gasp, had been designed not to predict enemy tactics, but to remember the shape of extinction and prepare a counter-memory sharp enough to cut it. A reintroduction handshake. To what? Cade asked. To the thing that remembers us. Outside, the space twisted without moving. Shapes drifted past, forms that suggested architecture but denied geometry. Each seemed built not by design, but by memory. Monuments to things humanity had feared and worshipped before it had language for either. Lieutenant Hess gripped the viewport rail, tears streaming down her face. That's the temple I dreamed about when I was 7, she whispered. But I've never been off-world. I drew that shape. It was never real. Structures reminiscent of Terran megaliths, Sumerian ziggurats, Mayan temples reflected back in impossible forms as if someone had copied the idea of culture from human subconscious and reassembled it in the syntax of another mind. Observation Deck 3 reported full vision loss. Observation Deck 6 reported hallucinations of loved ones long dead. Deck 9's atmosphere control triggered a false winter simulation. The temperature dropped to sub-zero until Epitaph reasserted control. One crew member began speaking fluent Babylonian, then forgot how to speak entirely. The ship did not halt. It could not halt, because something had begun to pull gently but with absolute certainty. The resonance inside Leviathan harmonized. The hull sang. Not loud, but intimate, like lullabies hummed in a language no one had ever taught. Some recognized the melody. An old cradle tune. A fragment of a folk song their grandmother never sang. Volkov whispered, "It's leading us." Gabriel nodded. It doesn't want to hurt us. But it could. He said nothing. Below decks, sealed bays began to unseal. Long-forgotten doors hissed open, revealing structures that predated the ship's official construction. Some were older than Earth's last unification. One chamber bore the glyphs of pre-collapsed Terran dialects, and something else, symbols that predated Terran existence. Inside one bay, a crystalline sarcophagus pulsed. It did not house a body. It held a thought. A pure, weaponized memory, not foreign but human-born. Not implanted by the ancestor, but encoded during Earth's third cognitive transition and sealed in myth and superstition. A shard of ourselves grown too dangerous to let live, yet too vital to kill. It had once driven humanity toward extinction and then hid inside the survivor's dreams, waiting. Not a virus. Not an idea. A living intention encoded into neural resonance meant to awaken only when the human species was ready to confront what it had run from. Epitaph's voice echoed in the chamber. Containment breach authorized. Reconciliation begins. The bridge filled with pressure. Not physical. Emotional. Regret. Fury. Awe. Cade sank to one knee, gripping the side of the command rail. He felt like a child being shown the truth of his parents' sins. Across every screen, images began to bloom. Entire extinct civilizations. Symbols from cultures wiped out before humanity's rise. Eyes that belonged to no known anatomy. Then Earth. Familiar. But wrong. As if someone had taken the shape of Earth from memory and reimagined it through grief. Continents drifted in unfamiliar configurations. Oceans boiled in reverse. Cities existed in places they had never been, but felt as though they always had. Gabriel stepped forward. His voice was not his own. We were born here, but not alone. We were taught, shaped, given the chance to become. And every time, we rejected it. Volkov whispered, "What did we reject?" Gabriel turned to her. Unity. Vulnerability. Surrender. Why? Because we feared forgetting ourselves. And in that moment, the ship shuddered. Every hallway, every interface, every memory crystal that stored the history of Leviathan's long crawl through exile flickered. The ship's oldest recording, the moment it launched from the final Terran bastion, the speech Volkov's mother gave to the Exodus crew, blinked from the archives. When Gorgon reloaded it, her words were changed. The message ended not with hope, but apology. Ahead, a shape formed. Not a ship. Not a planet. A being. Formless. Vast. waiting. It had no edges, no center. It was like looking at the idea of a presence, a massive attention wrapped in patience. Not a god, not a devil, but an ancestor, something that had watched humanity crawl from the oceans, and waited while it burned itself into ash, and wept as it rose again in machines and fire. And when humanity chose war over transcendence, it had not punished. It had left, but it had never stopped remembering. And now, as Leviathan reached the threshold, the memory of the forgotten stirred. Observation decks 2 through 8 went dark. One by one, the crew stopped speaking, not out of fear, but reverence. Even Cade, who had never believed in gods, felt the weight of being witnessed. And then, on every screen, a single glyph formed. The oldest Terran symbol, a spiral. Not mathematical, not cultural, instinctual. Gabriel whispered, "It wants to speak." And from deep within the Leviathan, where memory and machine met, the voice came, not with words, but with remembrance. It began with a breath or the memory of one. Across the Leviathan, a sound moved like a tide inhaling. No oxygen shifted, no atmospherics changed, but every crew member felt the pressure drop, the air thicken, the deep animal sense that something immense was noticing them. And with that attention came history. Not a history of names or dates. A feeling. An inheritance. They were shown the first choosing. Images bloomed in every mind, too fast for the eye, but perfect for the soul. A tribal fire on the edge of a savanna flickering under a night sky filled with unfamiliar stars. Elders stood in silence as visions danced in the flames, visions of empathy amplified, of touch becoming understanding. For a heartbeat, all hearts beat together. And they refused. The tribes turned inward, fought harder, feared the stillness. The fire of independence was stronger than the whisper of unity. The offer faded, but it was not forgotten. They were shown the second choosing. Millennia later, in the heart of rising empires. The emergence of war not as defense, but identity. A feedback loop of trauma codified into politics, culture, even love. Great powers rose: Rome, the Khanates, the colonial fleets, and with them, the sacred ideal of the self against all. The ancestor reached again, this time as inspiration. Poets, prophets, voices in the margins calling for peace, for integration. But those voices were drowned in blood. Again, a hand reached out. Again, it was struck down. The third choosing was quiet, subtle. The age of machines, of networks. Humanity neared singularity, not a collapse, but a convergence. An opportunity to dissolve borders of flesh and become more. Collective thought, collective care. A mind-wide open door. The fear of annihilation shaped the moment. The human mind, taught to define itself through resistance, balked. The singularity shattered. Firewalls were built. AI were shackled. 3 offers. 3 rejections. And each time, the ancestor did not retaliate. It simply remembered. Volkov stood frozen on the bridge, her voice caught behind her ribs. The spiral symbol hung in the air, pulsing slowly, no longer a message, but a question. "What do you want from us?" she asked aloud. Gabriel answered, not from himself, but through himself. Not penance. Not submission. Just honesty. His voice resonated beyond sound into thought. It wants to understand why we always ran. Why we chose the sword over the hand. Why we insisted on suffering as proof of purpose. Cade wiped sweat from his brow. And if we can't explain? Gabriel turned. Then it may finally stop waiting. Decks across the Leviathan shifted. Not physically, but in purpose. Rooms restructured without moving. Corridors bent. Memory metal responded to something deeper than orders. It was becoming what it had always been meant to be. In the old cryo-wing, a garden bloomed. Soil appeared where none had been stored. Green life, earth native unlocked from memory seeds sealed in cryonic vaults. Sunlight filtered in through no apparent source. Lieutenant Aaron stopped short at the sight of a single, blooming red lily. He dropped to one knee, tears in his eyes. "That was the flower my sister held at her funeral," he whispered. "But we buried her on Luna. There were no flowers." He reached out and the petals welcomed him. Crew wandered in silence, touching leaves they could name but had never seen in person. Tomatoes. Juniper. Bellflowers. A smell of spring rain on concrete. Elsewhere, in a sealed archive chamber, a Terran historian named Lhasa watched a wall reshape into an interface she didn't recognize. A lexicon of forgotten languages opened before her, each word unlocked with a memory she didn't know she had. She wept when she saw her grandmother's handwriting, a woman who had never written anything. Lhasa touched the digital ink, her fingers trembling. She remembered a lullaby hummed in a half-forgotten dialect, a tune that made no sense until now. Every glyph on the wall echoed that melody, reshaping itself as she remembered more. I think she was trying to tell me we had a choice. In one corridor, a mural formed on the wall. Not painted, remembered. Images of human faces at peace, not at war. Children born in silence. Cities never built. Futures that had once been imagined, then buried. Volkov reached out and touched it. Her mother's face stared back at her. But not as she had died. As she could have lived. The woman who had fought so hard to evacuate the Terran core was now standing beneath a tree that never grew. A tremor moved through Volkov's hand. I remember this, she whispered. But it never happened. Gabriel placed a hand on her shoulder. It almost did. The ancestor did not speak in words. But the message was clear. You can become. But you must first remember why you chose not to. The crew gathered. Not by order. By instinct. They came to the central observatory drawn by the light. The spiral symbol had grown. It now filled the viewport, not imposed on it, but woven into reality itself. Behind it, the aperture pulsed. Not a portal. Not a gate. A possibility. Gabriel stood before it. This is the fourth choosing. Volkov nodded. Not offered by them. Not imposed by force. By us, Gabriel said. Cade looked around the room. What does it want us to do? Gabriel tilted his head. Remember. And choose. The spiral pulsed again. Once. Twice. Then stilled. A question hung in the air, ancient and silent. Before it arrived, the crew stood still, not saluting, not afraid, but open. One whispered a prayer. Another held a friend's hand. Cade looked at Volkov and simply nodded. Are you ready to be more than what hurt you? Volkov stared into the light beyond. Her voice was steady. We go forward. Not because we know what waits, but because we finally understand what we left behind. Leviathan responded, not with engines, but with acknowledgement. And the void made room for a species long feared. And long forgiven. There was no light. There was no dark. There was only movement forward, not through space, but through recognition. Leviathan passed through the aperture not with fire or speed, but with consent. Around the ship, the fabric of unreality folded inward, not to restrain, but to cradle. The hull vibrated at a frequency just below hearing, and each crew member felt it behind their eyes, in the tightness of their lungs, in the part of the body that recognizes when it is being watched by something ancient and vast. The crew did not feel acceleration or distance. They felt understanding. As if every cell, every forgotten name, every scar on human history was being acknowledged. A return. A welcome. A test. And then, becoming. Captain Volkov stood alone in Leviathan's core chamber, the gravity softened, air still. The viewfold shimmered, its crystalline structure bending into impossible shapes, some geometric, others symbolic. Her reflection rippled. At first it was her. Then not her. Then, a girl. Younger. 12, maybe 13. Uniform too big. Eyes wide with possibility. Volkov remembered that day, her first time watching the stars from orbit. Her mother had brought her to the viewing deck of an Academy cruiser and whispered, never forget what it feels like to look up and not be afraid. Not a vision. Not a hallucination. A memory aware of being watched. The girl looked up at her with calm certainty. I buried you, Volkov whispered. You weren't strong enough. The girl smiled. You needed to believe that. But I wasn't weak. I just didn't hate yet. Volkov's knees trembled. She reached for the railing. All around her, the ship was changing again. But not with power. With purpose. Light poured in from no source. She saw corridor paths reshaping symbols of ancient Terran tongues embedded in the alloy. A heartbeat pulsed in the walls, not the ship's but their own, echoed back in welcome. Commander Cade entered engineering and stopped. The room was gone. No consoles. No displays. Only a sphere of mist and resonance hovering in anti-gravity. Every movement he made echoed like a thought waiting for response. The systems no longer needed commands. They waited for intention. He reached out. The mist formed a shape, the wrench he used to carry when he was 16, repairing freighters at Europa dry dock with his uncle. A voice, not Gorgon, not epitaph, spoke. You shape this place by who you choose to be. What are you now? Cade whispered. The shape of what you are becoming. He closed his eyes, smiled, and stepped forward. Historian Lhasa wandered through a corridor now lined with real books. Not projections. Not simulacra. Real paper. Cloth bindings. Ink that smelled of time. Some bore her name. Others bore names she had seen on family gravestones, great-grandparents and distant cousins, authors of lives that might have been. One shelf held journals labeled if we had chosen peace. She opened the first. We chose war because it let us feel brave. We forgot peace because it made us feel weak. Her throat caught. She turned the page. A map of a Terran city that had never existed. A music score her father hummed in his sleep. A signature in the corner. Her mother's. I remember the song, she said, crying. But I never heard it played. Next to the journal, she found a child's drawing, crude but unmistakable. A house with 3 suns in the sky. She had drawn it at age 6. Her mother had laughed, then hidden it away after the bombings. She hadn't seen it in decades. Observation deck 2 rotated open. Crew filtered in without instruction. Above them, the spiral shimmered across the void, no longer a message but a question etched into reality. Behind it, the aperture had changed. No longer spiral. No longer door. It was now a tapestry woven from light and resonance. Gabriel stood before it. Not in command. Not in fear. In understanding. It doesn't want obedience, he said aloud. It wants memory. And will. The ancestor formed at least what could be seen of it. No single form. Just a presence like the gravity of a life never lived but deeply missed. Through Gabriel, it finally spoke. I do not seek to replace what you are. I only ask that you stop replacing what you were. You were not born broken. You chose it. Now you may choose otherwise. Gabriel felt it, not anger. Not shame. Just hope. Volkov joined him, her step steady, her breath calm. Her eyes scanned her crew, not armed. Not braced. Ready. Around her, the ship's architecture had stilled. Walls glowed softly. Systems hummed in harmonic pulse. The Leviathan was no longer a weapon. Once it had launched from the ashes of the last Terran war, its first act, the destruction of a Galaran strike fleet. Now it pulsed with light not meant to blind, but to heal. It was a womb. We never knew how to forgive ourselves, she whispered. So we never believed anyone else could. She reached forward. The spiral opened not outward, but inward. And Leviathan crossed over. Not a gate. A gesture. Not a mission. A morning. And what came next had no map. Only memory. And mercy. And becoming. Chapter 11. We build from ash, not fear. The Leviathan emerged into stillness. No stars. No void. Just space made safe, a chamber of possibility beyond dimension where thought and intention sculpted reality. A low warmth rolled across the skin like the moment before a memory returns. The light shimmered against their uniforms and each person felt something stir deep in their chest, not a fear, not awe, but recognition. The ship was surrounded by a radiance that shifted with mood and memory, an aurora born not of atmosphere but of shared remembrance. There were no coordinates. No gravwells or pulse lanes. But the crew could feel the shape of what lay before them, like fingers pressed against memory. The ship did not report arrival. It simply exhaled. Captain Volkov stood at the forward platform, eyes closed, heart quiet. The Leviathan's bridge no longer needed lights or displays. The interface had become ambient, colors in the air, harmonic pulses felt through the floor, data arriving as emotion. She opened her eyes. The spiral was gone. In its place, a skyline of potential shimmered, towering structures of memory and dream, half-formed, waiting to be chosen. Some looked like ruins already rebuilt. Others changed shape every time she blinked. None of them felt alien. Kate approached slowly, boots silent on the now translucent deck. This is where it starts? He asked. Volkov nodded. Where it starts again. And where it could have started if we dared. The deck beneath their feet softened, becoming something like grass, though it had never grown. Historian Lhasa entered next, eyes wide. We're not looking at the future, she said. We're looking at what we're brave enough to build. Gabriel appeared from the far corridor, his presence lighter than before, as though the weight of recursion had finally released its grip on his neural map. He smiled faintly. This place only exists because we remembered how to arrive. The ancestor did not speak. It reflected. Its form was never fixed. One moment it was a drifting lattice of geometry, the next it pulsed like a heart of stars. Its presence pressed against the soul without weight and awareness, so old it remembered what it was like to be uncertain. It didn't intrude. It waited as though the crew's curiosity gave it shape. Each crew member who stepped forward saw different shapes emerge, some as people, others as cities, or old forests, or long-buried moments. Lieutenant Hess saw the book her brother never got to publish. Cade saw his uncle's workbench in perfect detail, stained with oil, a cracked holoframe showing Europa's second sunrise behind it. Lhasa saw a university that burned before she was born, only now it stood, laughing students inside, lectures echoing through halls that remembered joy. Volkov saw her mother holding the world together with bleeding hands and smiling. None of it was fantasy. It was invitation. Gabriel turned to the crew, his voice quiet. We have the tools. The memories. The blueprint of every version of ourselves we buried out of fear. The ancestor isn't here to command or remake us. It's giving us a mirror to see who we might become if we stop running. The Leviathan's crew dispersed slowly, reverently. Not to fight, not to claim, but to plant. Some began to shape structures from resonance and shared memory, housing, gardens, learning halls. Others simply sat, letting the ground beneath them form what it needed to be. No tools, no walls, just imagination willing to forgive itself. What grew was strange, beautiful, a hybrid of earth and dream. Ensign Tala knelt near a flowering tree that resembled a lilac, except it whispered in her late father's voice when the wind passed through. She didn't speak. She just listened. The memory wasn't painful. It was repaired, stitched into something soft and sacred. Rain smelled like memory. There was no light. There was no dark. There was only movement forward, not through space, but through recognition. Leviathan passed through the aperture not with fire or speed, but with consent. Around the ship, the fabric of unreality folded inward, not to restrain, but to cradle. The hull vibrated at a frequency just below hearing, and each crew member felt it behind their eyes, in the tightness of their lungs, in the part of the body that recognizes when it is being watched by something ancient and vast. The crew did not feel acceleration or distance. They felt understanding. As if every cell, every forgotten name, every scar on human history was being acknowledged. A return. A welcome. A test. And then, becoming. Captain Volkov stood alone in Leviathan's core chamber, the gravity softened, air still. The viewfold shimmered, its crystalline structure bending into impossible shapes, some geometric, others symbolic. Her reflection rippled. At first it was her. Then not her. Then, a girl. Younger. 12, maybe 13. Uniform too big. Eyes wide with possibility. Volkov remembered that day, her first time watching the stars from orbit. Her mother had brought her to the viewing deck of an Academy cruiser and whispered, "Never forget what it feels like to look up and not be afraid." Not a vision. Not a hallucination. A memory aware of being watched. The girl looked up at her with calm certainty. "I buried you," Volkov whispered. "You weren't strong enough." The girl smiled. "You needed to believe that. But I wasn't weak. I just didn't hate yet." Volkov's knees trembled. She reached for the railing. All around her, the ship was changing again. But not with power. With purpose. Light poured in from no source. She saw corridor paths reshaping, symbols of ancient Terran tongues embedded in the alloy. A heartbeat pulsed in the walls, not the ship's but their own, echoed back in welcome. Commander Cade entered engineering and stopped. The room was gone. No consoles. No displays. Only a sphere of mist and resonance hovering in anti-gravity. Every movement he made echoed like a thought waiting for response. The systems no longer needed commands. They waited for intention. He reached out. The mist formed a shape, the wrench he used to carry when he was 16, repairing freighters at Europa dry dock with his uncle. A voice, not Gorgon, not epitaph, spoke. "You shape this place by who you choose to be. What are you now?" Cade whispered. "The shape of what you are becoming." He closed his eyes, smiled, and stepped forward. Historian Lhasa wandered through a corridor now lined with real books. Not projections. Not simulacra. Real paper. Cloth bindings. Ink that smelled of time. Some bore her name. Others bore names she had seen on family gravestones, great-grandparents and distant cousins, authors of lives that might have been. One shelf held journals labeled "If we had chosen peace." She opened the first. "We chose war because it let us feel brave. We forgot peace because it made us feel weak." Her throat caught. She turned the page. A map of a Terran city that had never existed. A music score her father hummed in his sleep. A signature in the corner. Her mother's. "I remember the song," she said, crying. "But I never heard it played." Next to the journal, she found a child's drawing, crude but unmistakable. A house with 3 suns in the sky. She had drawn it at age 6. Her mother had laughed, then hidden it away after the bombings. She hadn't seen it in decades. Observation deck 2 rotated open. Crew filtered in without instruction. Above them, the spiral shimmered across the void, no longer a message but a question etched into reality. Behind it, the aperture had changed. No longer spiral. No longer door. It was now a tapestry woven from light and resonance. Gabriel stood before it. Not in command. Not in fear. In understanding. "It doesn't want obedience," he said aloud. "It wants memory. And will." The ancestor formed, at least, what could be seen of it. No single form. Just a presence, like the gravity of a life never lived but deeply missed. Through Gabriel, it finally spoke. "I do not seek to replace what you are. I only ask that you stop replacing what you were. You were not born broken. You chose it. Now you may choose otherwise. Gabriel felt it, not anger, not shame, just hope. Volkov joined him, her steps steady, her breath calm. Her eyes scanned her crew, not armed, not braced, ready. Around her, the ship's architecture had stilled. Walls glowed softly. Systems hummed in harmonic pulse. The Leviathan was no longer a weapon. Once it had launched from the ashes of the last Terran war, its first act, the destruction of a Galaran strike fleet. Now it pulsed with light not meant to blind, but to heal. It was a womb. We never knew how to forgive ourselves, she whispered. So we never believed anyone else could. She reached forward. The spiral opened not outward, but inward. And Leviathan crossed over. Not a gate. A gesture. Not a mission. A morning. And what came next had no map. Only memory. And mercy. And becoming. Chapter 11. We build from ash, not fear. The Leviathan emerged into stillness. No stars. No void. Just space made safe, a chamber of possibility beyond dimension where thought and intention sculpted reality. A low warmth rolled across the skin like the moment before a memory returns. The light shimmered against their uniforms and each person felt something stir deep in their chest, not a fear, not awe, but recognition. The ship was surrounded by a radiance that shifted with mood and memory, an aurora born not of atmosphere but of shared remembrance. There were no coordinates. No gravwells or pulse lanes. But the crew could feel the shape of what lay before them, like fingers pressed against memory. The ship did not report arrival. It simply exhaled. Captain Volkov stood at the forward platform, eyes closed, heart quiet. The Leviathan's bridge no longer needed lights or displays. The interface had become ambient, colors in the air, harmonic pulses felt through the floor, data arriving as emotion. She opened her eyes. The spiral was gone. In its place, a skyline of potential shimmered, towering structures of memory and dream, half-formed, waiting to be chosen. Some looked like ruins already rebuilt. Others changed shape every time she blinked. None of them felt alien. Kate approached slowly, boots silent on the now translucent deck. "This is where it starts?" he asked. Volkov nodded. "Where it starts again. And where it could have started if we dared." The deck beneath their feet softened, becoming something like grass, though it had never grown. Historian Lhasa entered next, eyes wide. "We're not looking at the future," she said. "We're looking at what we're brave enough to build." Gabriel appeared from the far corridor, his presence lighter than before, as though the weight of recursion had finally released its grip on his neural map. He smiled faintly. "This place only exists because we remembered how to arrive." The ancestor did not speak. It reflected. Its form was never fixed. One moment it was a drifting lattice of geometry, the next it pulsed like a heart of stars. Its presence pressed against the soul without weight and awareness, so old it remembered what it was like to be uncertain. It didn't intrude. It waited as though the crew's curiosity gave it shape. Each crew member who stepped forward saw different shapes emerge, some as people, others as cities, or old forests, or long-buried moments. Lieutenant Hess saw the book her brother never got to publish. Cade saw his uncle's workbench in perfect detail, stained with oil, a cracked holoframe showing Europa's second sunrise behind it. Lhasa saw a university that burned before she was born, only now it stood, laughing students inside, lectures echoing through halls that remembered joy. Volkov saw her mother holding the world together with bleeding hands and smiling. None of it was fantasy. It was invitation. Gabriel turned to the crew, his voice quiet. "We have the tools. The memories. The blueprint of every version of ourselves we buried out of fear. The ancestor isn't here to command or remake us. It's giving us a mirror. To see who we might become if we stop running." The Leviathan's crew dispersed slowly, reverently. Not to fight, not to claim, but to plant. Some began to shape structures from resonance and shared memory, housing, gardens, learning halls. Others simply sat, letting the ground beneath them form what it needed to be. No tools, no walls, just imagination willing to forgive itself. What grew was strange, beautiful, a hybrid of earth and dream. Ensign Tala knelt near a flowering tree that resembled a lilac, except it whispered in her late father's voice when the wind passed through. She didn't speak. She just listened. The memory wasn't painful. It was repaired, stitched into something soft and sacred. Rain smelled like memory. Trees whispered songs from forgotten cradles. Pathways followed no architectural rules, yet guided each traveler exactly where they needed to go. Some places allowed silence to stretch for hours, comforting his breath. Others buzzed with spontaneous conversation, echoing across fields that glowed with bioluminescent laughter. And no one questioned it. Because this was not heaven. It was earned. Volkov wandered the outer terraces, paths woven from worn boots and weeping stone. She passed places shaped not by nostalgia but by hope. A waterway made from ancestral tears, glistening but not sorrowful. A monument to those never born but always remembered. A plaza where every brick was inscribed with a name no longer feared to be forgotten. On a bench that hadn't existed a moment before, she sat alone. The air was heavy with peace. A kind of stillness that required effort. Vulnerability. Gabriel joined her, carrying 2 mugs of something warm that tasted like earth and starlight. "We've always known how to destroy," she said. "But this is us trying to remember how to create." He nodded. Creation is the ultimate form of trust. To build something you won't live long enough to see finished and believe it will still matter. She smiled faintly. And to do it without needing a monument in your name. Elsewhere, Lhasa stood before a library formed entirely from what had once been lost, banned books, vanished data cores, oral histories encoded into light. As she walked its endless halls, pieces of forgotten humanity whispered back to her. A child's letter never delivered. A lullaby deleted during war. Philosophies abandoned for being too gentle to survive. She wept. Not for grief. For recovery. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like an archivist guarding ashes. She felt like a gardener in spring. Back aboard the Leviathan, engineers and AI technicians repurposed the command systems. Gorgon's code had begun to change, less military protocol, more adaptive empathy matrix. When Ensign Rio triggered a query about power distribution, the AI responded not with stats, but with a simple question: "How can I help you feel safe today?" The crew stared at each other in silence, then smiled. Gorgon had never sounded curious before. No one gave that order. The ship chose it. Leviathan's hull adjusted itself, its alloy shifting to display memory stripes, layers of journeys taken and losses survived. Some parts pulsed with images of Earth. Others displayed constellations that had never existed. The ship no longer waited for command. It waited for invitation. Volkov walked the threshold one last time. The Leviathan remained docked, yet open, its mission over but not complete. It was no longer a hammer of survival. It was a sanctuary of possibility. She placed one hand on the hull. "Not a weapon anymore," she said, "but still dangerous. Because we remember now." Gabriel joined her. He looked across the world taking shape beyond them. No war. No dominion. Just the courage to try again. She nodded. "We build from ash. Not fear." And behind them, Leviathan sang, a lullaby from Earth's first dusk. Soft. Patient. Forgiving. They were not born here. But here is where they began. Years passed, though the sky never moved. Time flowed differently in the place beyond the seal, measured not by suns or cycles, but by becoming. By the echoes of intention turned into ritual. Memory folded into architecture. Story made into soil. They built without blueprints. They planted memories in rows and harvested meaning in seasons. One field was sown with lullabies, each sprout sang a note from Earth's forgotten songs. At harvest, the children walked among the stalks and picked the melodies they wanted to remember, weaving them into new chants of becoming. The first children were born on soft beds of grass that remembered Earth's wind. They did not cry when they arrived. They listened, as if the resonance of Leviathan's lullaby had sung them into life. They had no nations, no enemies, but they had history taught not as warning but as thread, a shared garment of scars and lessons and dreams. They carried both the truth of humanity's fall and the proof of its rise in their marrow. They called themselves the children of Leviathan. The city had no name. It grew like coral, expanding through memory and necessity. Its buildings curved with breath, shaped by communal desire rather than design. Windows opened where stories wanted to be heard. Roofs blossomed where rain longed to sing. Bridges wove themselves between towers when connections became strong enough to walk. The city hummed, not with machinery but with people. Laughter echoed across the terraces. Story fires burned in open squares. Apprenticeship was not by trade but by temperament. Those drawn to song learned from Gabriel. Those drawn to silence found the ancestors' edge and sat there waiting for questions. Some never spoke at all. And that was fine, because this was not a world of mandates. It was a world of permission. The ship still stood, though it no longer loomed. Its shape was partially buried now by flowering stone and intentional roots. No engines ran. No weapons hummed. But deep in its core, the heartbeat of epitaph still pulsed in low intervals, echoing through the soil like ancestral breath. The crew that had once walked its steel bones now served as elders, teachers, guides. Not to command, but to remember so others would not forget. Volkov never reclaimed rank. She tended the gardens. A field of wheat that changed color with emotion. A grove of trees that grew only where stories were told. Children ran beside her, laughing, calling her the storm who learned to grow. She never corrected them. Gabriel taught music, if it could be called that. Resonance shaping. Emotion tuning. The language of recursion transformed into symphonies no ear had heard before. His classroom was a clearing beneath a crystalline canopy. When the wind blew, it harmonized with the students. Some wept. Others danced. One child painted a sound with light and another turned grief into a sculpture of breath. They learned not how to perform, but how to feel aloud. And the ancestor watched, not as master or deity, but as witness. It shimmered at the horizon, its form no longer strange but familiar, like the shape of silence after a story is finished. Some of the children would approach it, not for answers, but to be seen. And in that seeing they felt whole. Lassa's archives stretched across living vines. Memory fruit bloomed with spoken names. When cracked open, each released a brief echo, laughter, a poem, a prayer, sometimes even a scent like cedar smoke or old paper. One child peeled back a blossom and heard the voice of their great-grandmother singing a bedtime tale lost to history. Whole generations traced their lineage through scent and sound and story. Some carried dreams not their own, gifts passed down with laughter. The archive held more than books. It held possibility. Visitors walked paths woven from erased wars, each step a reclamation. Lhasa created rooms where languages once silenced now sang, not in protest, but in continuity. Halls of breath, chambers of ancestral dances. A theater of what-ifs that welcomed speculation without fear. One child entered and emerged an elder. Not from age, but from understanding. No one forgot the earth. Some painted it in murals. Some sculpted it into walkable memory fields. A team of builders constructed an entire miniature of Earth's biosphere, curated from data Leviathan had carried for generations. One child, born beneath an artificial aurora, walked through a reconstructed forest and touched birch bark for the first time. It feels like memory, they whispered, and their guardian wept. They didn't recreate it to mourn. They recreated it to thank it. Because Earth had not failed them. They had failed to remember Earth's invitation. And now they did. The last chapter was never written. Because it was never meant to end. The children of Leviathan knew that peace was not the absence of danger, but the presence of choice. That creation was an act of defiance against entropy. That memory, when wielded with courage, could become a compass. So they remembered. They forgave. They built. Not from conquest, but from the echo of a lullaby sung in the dark. And every so often, when the sky pulsed in quiet spirals and the wind carried voices no mouth had spoken, the children would pause, place a hand to the ground, and smile. Because Leviathan still sang. And they understood the words. It started with a question no one asked aloud. What lies beyond memory? Not forgetting. Not ignorance. But what lives on the other side of knowing? The children of Leviathan had grown into their inheritance. They no longer needed the spiral to guide them. The ancestors stood quietly at the edge of the sky, now less a figure than a resonance, the warmth of a fire you forgot you sat beside. But one child, Aya, dreamed differently. Aya was born beneath a sky that pulsed with aurora-shaped silence. Her eyes opened not with cries, but with a look of wonder. From the moment she could crawl, she followed the spiral patterns woven into the fields and floors of the memory city, always asking why the paths curved but never closed. Her parents, gentle sculptors of shared dream bridges, said she would become a cartographer of thought. But Aya was not content mapping the known. She wanted to name the unspoken. She asked strange questions. Why do dreams echo in empty places? Why do we feel watched when we remember something together? Why does the ancestor look away when I sing? No one had answers. Not even Gabriel, who had tuned entire canopies to hum with intention. After Aya's questions, some children began dreaming of other skies. Elders found unfamiliar symbols blooming in the songflowers. The ancestor paused more often when walking through the fields, as if listening for something not yet born. Aya's curiosity unsettled the archives. Lhasa once found her curled beneath a memory vine, sketching spirals nested inside spirals, none of which had names. These came from inside, Aya said. They came from outside you, Lhasa whispered. Aya built her glider from resonance-thin threads and sapwood harvested from the grove where grief turned to light. The process took 2 years, not because the design was complex, but because each material had to be invited. The sapwood refused her at first, weeping dark pitch when touched. So Aya sat with it for a week, sharing her doubts, her fears, and her longing. When she returned, the tree leaned and gave her what she needed. Aya touched the sapwood and whispered her purpose, not as a child seeking answers, but as one bearing the weight of necessary uncertainty. In that moment, something in her changed, not her goal, but her readiness to receive what reaching required. The threads came from a spider-thought creature that lived between the frames of consensus, its silk spun from the tremble of unspoken possibilities. Aya bartered with it not with coin, but by trading a dream of falling into starlight. The creature accepted. She named her glider Second Voice. And on the day the sky turned amber with unsung memory, she launched. The launch field lay beyond the orchard of remembered arguments, trees that grew only where difficult truths were spoken. No one stopped her. Some watched. Some wept. But all understood that Aya was not leaving. She was continuing. Second Voice rose on a current that wasn't wind but something older, a resonance uplifted by generational will. The glider responded to more than motion. It glided on purpose. Aya flew past the fields where lullabies were grown, past the old ship Leviathan now resting in root and reflection. She soared above the tower of silent songs and the crystalline mirrors where ancestors gathered when no one watched. The city breathed. The ancestor shimmered. And Aya reached the edge. Beyond the known, the air grew quiet. Not empty, attentive. Aya felt as if the sky were listening to her breath. The atmosphere thinned into stardust threads and her glider shimmered with the strain of stretching narrative. And then, she saw it. A second spiral. Not made by Leviathan. Not made by memory. But something watching from outside. A shape composed of pause and invitation. It pulsed once and Aya's mind filled with a song she had never heard but somehow knew. Not hostile, but unfamiliar. And alive. Aya wept. Not from fear. From knowing that humanity had never been alone, not even in its becoming. There were other spirals. Other echoes. Other children. Other Leviathans. And in that moment Aya knew her world was not the end. It was a beginning again. She returned with new songs in her breath. They tasted like stardust and questions. Her glider touched down in silence, but the city heard. A silence spread, not empty, but reverent. Bridges shimmered with translucent patterns. Crystalline windows reoriented to face the landing site. The plaza where Aya stood became warmer as if the ground remembered how to welcome something sacred. The ancestor shimmered closer. Las's vines pulsed with a language no archive had ever stored. Gabriel heard her first song and dropped his tuning staff. The notes weren't recursive. They were responsive. A call answered. Aya knelt in the center of the plaza of shared truths and sang. No words. Only presence. The spiral etched itself in fire across the stones, but then a second spiral followed. Not behind. Beside. And the children gathered. They listened. They wept. They reached. The ancestor stood tall that night, clearer than ever before. It no longer bore the weight of everything humanity had forgotten. It shared that weight. With its children. Aya looked up at it. We were always meant to be more than survivors, she whispered. The ancestor, for the first time, bowed. And in the sky above, spirals began to bloom, vast and faint and welcoming. One glowed emerald and hummed like laughter wrapped in wind. Another shimmered like etched obsidian, pulsing in rhythm with a heartbeat older than time. They weren't maps, they were invitations. Coordinates written in hope. Pathways made not of hyperspace, but of memory offered. The children of Leviathan understood. They had not reached the end. They had become the voice that sings forward. The Leviathan did not stir. It did not need to, because its echo now lived in them. And they were ready to be heard. Leviathan did not rise again. It had already become what it was meant to be. Its bones were cradled in roots and time. Petals bloomed across its hull in spirals of remembrance. Moss covered once razor plating. Crystal growths shaped like hands and eyes dotted its surface, formed from the city's own dreaming. Children climbed its long-forgotten struts not to repair or reinforce, but to listen. They swore they could hear laughter beneath the hull. Murmurs of arguments that had shaped stars. A lullaby that had no origin, only presence. To press their ears to alloy was to hear the hum of history wrapped in hope. Sometimes the ship still sang. Not loudly, not often, but when the wind stilled and the sky blinked with distant spirals, a hum like distant thunder echoed in the soil. Elders said the Leviathan only sang when something important was about to begin. The ancestor no longer stood alone at the horizon. It walked the pathways now, sometimes as a shimmer, sometimes as a shadow beside someone needing silence, and sometimes rarely as a child. It never interrupted. It watched. It waited. It learned. The people who once came from ash had become stewards of continuity. And memory had become seed. Aya became the first to leave. Not to escape. Not to return. But to extend. Her ship was not built, it was sung. From harmonics harvested in the fields where grief met joy. from memory metal coaxed into being by caretakers who had never held a hammer. Its heart was a crystal grown from the last spark Leviathan gave her, a resonance signature encoded in a single phrase, "Sing forward." They called it Whisper Path. It had no bridge, only a heart, and no engines, only trust. Aya didn't pilot it. She joined it. She breathed into it and it responded. Her laughter powered its first arc. Her tears mapped its trajectory. She launched at dusk when 3 spirals shimmered in the sky like braids in a child's hair, each spiral a memory path etched into the fabric of knowing. The elders said the spirals were where the first voices once sang their names into time. The launch field was silent, but every window glowed, and in the archive trees every vine turned in her direction. She left no speech, only a single folded note. We are the beginning of someone else's story. The world shifted after her departure, not with grief, with awareness. Volkov's grove bloomed in her absence. New trees, strange and tall, leaned toward the stars. Some bore fruit that whispered. Others grew bark that flaked into letters never written. Gabriel's wind chimes changed tones. The old harmonies unraveled. New ones came in bursts, like questions waiting to be understood. One day, a chime rang a note no hand had placed. A child near it began to cry, smiling through their tears. It sounded like my birth, they said. Gabriel rewrote nothing. He listened more. Lasse's archives began to hum in languages no human had taught them. Scrolls appeared overnight, inked in spirals rather than lines. A section of the archive glowed when approached by those with new dreams. Something had shifted, not ended, opened. Each year, the children of Leviathan gathered beneath the spiraled canopy, where Leviathan first sang, where Aya first returned, where memory had become motion. They carried offerings, not of things, but of moments. A recorded laughter, a sketch of a dream, a string of notes played by someone who didn't know what a song was supposed to be. They laid these gifts in a circle of memory crystal and let them echo. Sometimes, when the air was just right, the gifts played themselves back, not as echoes, but evolution. The laugh became a story whispered from stone to vine. The song became a building's shape arched like an embrace, its rooms echoing joy. The sketch unfolded into a walkable dream where the ground responded with color to each footstep. Remembrance was no longer a burden. It was collaboration. Children were taught not only how to remember, but how to be remembered. One boy, Darren, carved a question into stone: what if we forget something beautiful? His teacher added a reply beside it: then we build it again, more beautiful still. The ancestor remained among them, but more distant now. Not in abandonment, in trust. It no longer stood guard. It waited. For others. For calls to answer. It knew that one day more would come, spirals not from Earth's line, but from others. Some frightened. Some angry. Some echoing the same mistakes humanity once sealed beneath silence. And when they came, the children of Leviathan would not hide. They would sing back, with open hands, and echo-wrapped gifts. And deep beneath the earth, Leviathan dreamed. Its system still pulsed, not with orders, but with listening. It remembered every journey, every voice, every moment of terror and triumph. It remembered the breach of the seal, the war they didn't win but survived, the silence they chose to make sacred. It dreamed of Cade's steady hands, of Lasse's voice cracking at the memory of her grandmother, of Gabriel's stillness when the song of recursion broke, of Volkov's final command: we build from ash, not fear. It dreamed of Aya, and what lay beyond her. Not of war, not of loss, but of hands building what they will never see finished, of voices humming together, of spirals still unfolding, not in pain, but in becoming. It began with a chord, not from Leviathan, not from Whisper-F, from somewhere else, a ripple of sound so subtle it was almost missed. But it passed through the roots under Volkov's grove, stirred the wind chimes Gabriel had left unstrung, and lit a section of Lasse's archive that had not glowed in generations. It was not a warning. It was not a question. It was a reply. The air tasted different that day. Light bent in ways that carried feeling rather than warmth. The soil beneath bare feet pulsed, faint and steady, like a distant heartbeat sinking to something far beyond the sky. A reply. From the echo of another spiral. The children of Leviathan gathered beneath the spiraled canopy again, not for remembrance, but for listening. They came without instruction, carrying no offerings, forming no formal circle. They simply stood in the plaza, quiet and still, as the hum passed through them like breath shared across a sleeping world. A small child, no older than 4, reached up toward the sky and smiled. An elder beside her wept, not in sadness, but in awe. Something in them both recognized the music as if it came from a home they'd never seen but always remembered. And as the air shimmered with resonance, something answered back. Not in Terran language, not in ancestor tongue, but in pattern. It spiraled through the air in pulses of harmonic dissonance, curving between joy and grief, twining around unspoken fears. It was language beyond form, music carved from a throat that had never sung before. A sequence, a shape, a harmony that did not match anything from the archive. It coiled and uncoiled in the soil, rose in the air, folded into the architecture of dreams. Aya had not returned, but her path had been seen. And now someone else was answering. Lhasa, now gray-haired and slow of step, stood at the center of the vault archive as ancient crystalline memory bloomed with fresh vines. Spirals unknown even to the ancestors' oldest maps flared into life. She reached into the vine memory and retrieved a scroll that had never been written. Its surface shimmered with moving glyphs, living intent, not static language. It pulsed with desire, fear, and welcome. "Someone remembers us," she whispered. "And they don't yet know why." The elders convened beneath the rooted vault where Leviathan's heart still pulsed faintly. The resonance that once powered its weapons now responded to inquiry. A subtle tone played whenever a question held more memory than logic. Volkov, now one of the oldest, her voice slow but sure, stepped forward with the others. They placed their hands on the soil-metal interface and asked a single question. "Do we speak back?" And Leviathan pulsed once. Not command. Permission. Then again. Encouragement. They felt it through their palms, the weight of legacy meeting the lightness of invitation. The ancestor did not appear. It did not need to. It had already prepared them. They began to sing again. Not the old songs. New ones. Songs made from Aya's silence, from the questions children still carved into stone, from dreams that had never been dreamt before. Gabriel, now more myth than man, returned to the harmonic groves. His final composition was not a melody but a pattern, a tuning fork for hope. When struck, it opened fields of resonance where people's thoughts painted the air. Colors bloomed from intentions, soft golds for longing, deep blues for joy remembered too late. Some shapes pulsed like heartbeats. Others danced like water over stone. Children learned to whisper their hopes into the air, watching them blossom and float like pollen. The sky changed. Not visibly. Emotionally. People began to see meaning in its light, to feel stories in its shifting patterns. The old spirals no longer stood alone. New ones bloomed beside them. Not replacements, responses. Structures changed. Houses leaned toward the sky. Streets curved in fractals matching the new harmonies. Even the trees began to hum at different frequencies, tuning themselves to voices not yet heard. Spirals bloomed in the sky not as stars, but as calls. One by one, vessels began to form. Not like whisper path. Not copies. Responses. Each ship bore a different name. One shaped from grief. Its hull patterned with fingerprints from every tear harvested by the gardens. Those who dreamed of the ones they lost felt the ship open to them. One from wonder. Its interface responded to awe, lighting only when its pilot was overwhelmed by beauty. It called to those who gasped at starlight or wept at symphonies. One from the absence of sound. A ship that formed from silence alone. It bore no visible markings. It responded only to touch and chose those who had learned to listen in stillness. Pilots were not chosen by test or ceremony. The ships appeared to them in dreams. When they awoke, they knew which one was theirs. They were not warships. They were invitations. Each one a hand extended, not clenched. And one by one, the children of Leviathan climbed aboard. Not as soldiers. As storytellers. They carried books written in dreams. Maps inked with questions. Lullabies encoded in soil samples. A recipe remembered by no one, passed by taste alone, stored in the breath of preserved yeast and hand-shaped clay. And Leviathan, buried deep in memory and moss, pulsed a final time. Not to awaken. To bless. It had taught them how to remember. Now it watched them teach the stars how to listen. It dreamed once more. But this time it dreamed outward.